Hi, this is Cathy Gnatek. I continue my series on the 36 decans of the zodiac today with Libra II, the second decan of Libra. This particular part of the zodiac, we're going to find out, has a lot to do with commitments, keeping commitments, breaking commitments, the sense of loss we may have if commitments are broken, especially ones that involve relationship. Venus, the goddess of love, rules the sign of Libra, and everybody knows, if you know a little bit about astrology, that if Aries is the sign of me, Libra is the sign of we. It's this relational sign. How do I interact and communicate with a partner when I'm in connection with someone? And we're going to see this play out in the esoteric symbols that are associated with this part of the zodiac, as well as the tarot card, the Three of Swords, the card that's called Sorrow in the Thoth deck. And finally, interestingly enough, today, instead of looking at people who have their rising degree here in this part of the zodiac, we're going to talk about the late 1970s when Pluto was in this part of the zodiac, bringing up stuff from the underworld around these questions of commitment. If you lived through that period like I did, it was a moment when it seemed like there was an epidemic of divorce, and there's all kinds of interesting I don't know, news articles, and the movie Kramer versus Kramer came out during that time, and it was just in the air culturally. So we're really going to see this energy in this part of the zodiac. I hope you enjoy the video. If you do, like and subscribe. It helps people find my content, and I'm trying to grow my channel. Okay, so let's bring up the whiteboard that'll help us get a deeper feel for this decan. Okay, Libra, I always like to go over the basics of the sign in general that we're talking about, and then talk about the specific 10 degrees of the sign. That's the subject of the talk. So Libra is an air sign. Air signs are about communication, thought, ideas, sharing knowledge. And then we have Libra is ruled by Venus, the goddess of love. Venus is about beauty and balance and harmony, but also about justice, especially when she's in her morning star phase. She can be called the goddess of war. So she wants things to be balanced. Diplomacy is a big symbolic association with the sign of Libra in general. You'll have diplomats and politicians, people who speak in a beautiful manner and try to ensure all voices are heard, oftentimes have strong Libra placements. Last of all, Libra is a cardinal sign. All cardinal signs like to begin things. So there's an active energy, a masculine quality to this sign as well. When we get down to the decan that's associated, the 10 degrees associated with the second decan of Libra, the rulers of that decan, the 10 degrees to 20 degrees of Libra, are Saturn and Saturn under the decanic system, both the triplicity order and the Chaldean order. So who was Saturn? Saturn was Kronos in the Greek pantheon. Kronos means clock time. It means time literally. And Saturn was the keeper of time. If you think about Saturn, he's the last planet we can see with the naked eye. He has rings around it. So symbolically, Saturn has to do with boundaries, limitations. He was the Lord of Death. You see him in many images, like the image here, carrying a scythe. The scythe is associated with death because agriculturally, at the end of harvest season, you're using the scythe to cut the crops and make way for new beginnings, but it's also about endings and death. Saturn also can have to do with commitment, with karma, the idea of you reap what you sow, discipline, hard work. So it's got a serious leaden quality. And when we combine, if you think about it, the Venusian nature of the sign of Libra, which is about communication, with the Saturnian limitations, boundaries, what's possible in the real world, we get a real vibe with this part of the zodiac of it having to do with contracts, specifically sometimes with marriage contracts or relational contracts, seriousness around that question of, am I going to commit? And once I commit and give my heart to someone, what are the consequences if there's a breakage, if there's an ending to that? And this is not to say that people with planets in this part of the zodiac are going to necessarily have issues around divorce and things like that. But it's more that they're going to take commitments very seriously, and that um, they are going to understand that when they commit, there's this potential in the background, in the shadow side, for that a breakage of that commitment. So they may actually put more effort into a partnership or a relationship to ensure that it's fair and balanced and people are meeting their commitments. And of course, the energy of planets in this decan is really going to depend upon which planet it is. If Venus is there, it's going to bring more desire for connection. If Mars, or a more difficult planet, is there, it could bring potentially difficulties around questions of commitments. Again, this all depends on your chart, whether you were born during the day and at night, and whether you have other planets connected to that Mars, and so on. But just to give you a general feeling for this part of the zodiac. And so then we can also look at ancient texts, and they reinforce the idea that this decan can be about relationality and marriage. Picatrix describes a black man having a journey of marriage and joy, and this is a face of quiet joy, abundance, and the good life. There's a balance and a harmony to it, even if at the same time when we commit, there's sometimes a potential for having to understand the potential for rupture of that commitment. One last thing, just when they use terms like a black man, that is more symbolic of the idea of Saturn. Saturn is a dark planet, the furthest planet we can see with the naked eye. He's out there in the atmosphere. There's a heavy leaden quality about him, as opposed to it being literally a black person. And then we have Agrippa, two men furious and wrathful, and a man in a comely garment sitting in a chair. And the signification of these is to show indignation against evil and the quietness and security of life with plenty of good things. Now, here in Agrippa, we see more of the mix of the quality of the potential of this decan. I even think of, it's interesting, they have two men who are kind of serious and wrathful. Those could be Saturn, Saturn. And then we have another guy who's sitting there in a beautiful garment. That could be Venus, right? Because Venus rules the sign. And so there's this quality of a desire for harmony and peace and relationship and beauty, but also a seriousness that comes with Saturn ruling that decan. And then we can move on to look at the tarot cards associated with this part of the zodiac. And we see here the Three of Swords, a card that's pretty well known in the culture. Like if you don't even know anything about tarot, you may have seen this card. Some folks may see this as a really dark card. I think oftentimes people do. It's called Sorrow in the Thoth deck. There's something in me, perhaps because I have a little bit more of a serious nature and Saturn is in some ways strong in my chart. I see somewhat the beauty of acceptance of loss and endings. If you look at the card, it's got a very balanced quality. We have the three swords, they're piercing the heart, and there is a storm in the background. But it's almost like a completion of an idea, a completion of a letting go. There's sorrow, but there's also the capacity to let go, right? There's a finality to the card. And then let's look at the tree of life in Kabbalah, because whatever tarot card we're looking at, we can always look at the number, and there's always going to be an association between the tarot card and the decan and the Kabbalah. In fact, the people who designed the tarot cards had the Kabbalah in mind as they were designing them, these ideas. So the Kabbalah is an ancient Jewish mystic tradition, and they have a tree of life. And this tree of life represents the descent of divine inspiration into the world. You go from the top, Cater, number one, where it's sort of the great unknown spirit descending into material form. And then we go to number two, which is Chokmah, and then on to Binah, and then Hesed. You see the lightning strike of energy descending into material form here. And it traces the flow of that creative energy from divine source at the top, to the physical world, Malkuth at the bottom. And this process illustrates how spiritual concepts take form and manifest in reality. So then we can take a little deeper look and use the notions of the movement from Chokmah to Binah to weave in and connect and get a deeper understanding of that tarot card, and the esoteric meanings that we talked about. So if we're talking about the movement from Chokmah to Binah, this is like taking that big raw idea and turning it into something real. Chokmah is the limitless potential, while Binah is where things take shape with structure and boundaries. Binah is the feminine side of the receptive side of the tree of life. And so you can compare this to the idea of marriage, where we have two people coming together to create a shared life. But with the union comes responsibility, that idea of Saturn, right? And sometimes the pain of things not working out. The second decan of, and I say that too in part because Saturn can be about ending. So he can bring this potential both of commitment, but then when the commitment is finished, time to end, Saturn can bring its ending as well. The second decan of Libra is, as I said, influenced by Saturn and highlights the balance between love, Venus, and responsibility, Saturn. Libra seeks harmony and connection, but Saturn brings the weight of commitment and reality to that connection. Marriage or deep relationships can feel beautiful, but when they break, it can be devastating. Hence, that Three of Swords card, which shows that heartbreak. The pierced heart reflects the pain of separation or losing something that was once whole, right? When you had this marriage and potentially it breaks apart. Again, not everybody who has planets or points. This is not all about endings, but it's also about the seriousness of commitment and staying in a commitment. So all of these decans have multiple sides to them, right? And it could be someone with planets in this decan just takes commitments very seriously and responsibly, and they're very important to them. Um, yeah, okay. So then let's move on. And one of the reasons I keep emphasizing this is not just about the ending of commitments, is because the example I'm using, instead of using somebody's chart who has their rising degree here in the third decan, I thought I'd talk about the fact that from 1976 to 1980, when Pluto was in this part of the zodiac, is when we had the divorce epidemic, as the New York Times talked about in its article in June of 1976. We also see some other images here from the Observer, a London newspaper, about the divorcing society, this being really the topic in the air at that during that period of time. We also have the movie Kramer versus Kramer came out during that time in 1979. And this hits pretty close to home for me, because I was right there in a front seat to observe the divorces that began to happen in 1976. I very much remember I was about 12 years old, and all of a sudden I started hearing about one set of my parents' friends getting divorced, and then seeing those friends, other friends coming over and talking to my parents. You know how you kids listen to their parents talking in the background, and everybody was talking about divorce. And before you knew it, um, the woman across the street got divorced too, and my mom would be talking to her about that. And then ultimately in 1980, right in the middle of all this, my parents got divorced, and it framed the culture and my generation having grown up in that. You can kind of also see articles about what that was, but I think it's so fascinating. Pluto, the god of the underworld, who has to do with transformation. This was a transformational moment in society at large, not just in the United States, but other countries as well, as this god of transformation and upheaval and forcing us to look at sort of things that have been oppressed and suppressed in culture all came up during this period. I'll say one more thing about that. Um, it, the divorce, the divorce explosion came on the heels of women's liberation, among other things. and women beginning to question this idea of what marriage is and is not. Oh, this also reminds me One Day at a Time, that TV show. If you're older like me, you'll remember it about a woman who left her husband, who was kind of patriarchal and oppressive, to live on her own. That also came out during this time. Anyway, it's interesting to think about from a bigger standpoint, these big shifts of culture around themes. And this particular shift around what is it to be married, what is the marriage contract about, came about when Pluto was in these 10 degrees of the zodiac, this part of the zodiac that has to do with relationships and commitments and what they mean. So I thought that was fascinating. I will also add, seems like recently, as far as clients that I've been seeing, while the sun is in this part of the zodiac, these issues have been coming up at the same time, questions about commitment in their partnership and what matters. So that's always fascinating. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, do like and subscribe. And I'll see you in a little while with Libra 3. Talk soon. Bye-bye.